Hey, it's Rachel Cooke, your modern mentor. And today's episode is all about mastering failure. I feel like we talk so much about learning from failure, and somehow we're all still terrified of it. So how do we start to shift our mindset and our comfort levels with failing a little bit more? I've got some thoughts. So, fun fact about me, my gym is my happy place. It's like my Disney World. I love being there, and I think it's a huge part of what keeps me successful in juggling all the balls I have in the air. Also, vanity is real, and bathing suit season is not too far off. One of the things I love about working out is that at the gym, failure is literally the thing we strive for. It's the word we use when we couldn't possibly eke out one more rep. Failure in exercise is accomplishment. It means you left it all on the floor, and now it's time to celebrate. But at work, failure is still kind of the F word. We want to learn from it. We want to use it to teach us how to move forward, but mostly we just hide from it. Or we avoid it by making super safe choices, which keep us from failing, but also keep us from creating or experimenting. It keeps us kind of vanilla. And I think we need a little bit more chocolate sauce on there. So if you're an innovator at heart, or even just a wannabe innovator, and you want to create more space for testing and learning, and yes, failing at work, how can you do this without feeling like you're putting your job on the line? I think it starts with redefining failure. When someone drops the ball or misses a deadline, or they send out that unproofed campaign, we call that failure. But that isn't failure, that's straight up carelessness. Those are undesirable outcomes due to bad action or inaction. Failure, on the other hand, is an undesirable outcome resulting from a good action, a risk, an experiment, an alternative approach, but done with intention and planning. If your last ad campaign performed poorly because you didn't do the research to understand your target market, that's carelessness. But if it performed poorly because you were intentionally testing a new market to learn what they respond best to, then it's a failure. It was done with intent and it has intelligence to offer. Can you see the difference? The more we start to claim a better definition of failure and decouple it from carelessness, the more space we'll get to play with it. Next, I think it's about hunting for the insight. Now that we're clear on what failure is, the next thing we need to do is harness its intelligence. There's this classic episode of Friends where Rachel decides to make a trifle. Through a mishap with a cookbook and 2 pages getting stuck together, she ends up concocting this combo of sweets and meats. The only insight that the friends take away that night is never to eat Rachel's cooking again. It was comedic carelessness. But take that same scenario and imagine Rachel actually wanted to experiment with intention. She really wanted to learn how people might respond to a meats and sweets fest. She'd have made the recipe, watched their reactions, and asked some follow-up questions, assuming they would still be willing to speak to her. Like, what specifically didn't you like about it? What if I dialed up the sweetness or dialed down the savoriness? What if I'd added cheese or peppermint or bubblegum? In the second scenario, the outcome is equally rancid, but it's made with an intention to learn. The experimenter has an opportunity to find some insight so that next time she knows to add the peppermint and skip the beef. So, what's a what if that you've been curious about at work, but maybe a little afraid to try? With a new definition of failure, can you ready yourself to run an experiment knowing that you'll find some insight at the end to help you tweak your direction next time? From there, try changing a variable. Learning from failure is about using the insight you gain to be more intelligent the next time. Maybe you sent out a bold marketing campaign, or you tested a super modern store display, and customers kind of didn't love it. That's okay, because you've observed their behavior, or you got some feedback, or you tracked certain metrics, which told you what specifically didn't work, and what might be worth trying next time. So now you try again, standing on the shoulders of what you've already learned. Your next version of that campaign uses smarter color choices, or a clearer call to action. Or your next store display leaves more space between items, or puts the right shirts and shoes closer together so customers can see how well they pair. Once you learn something, try again. Make a change and see how the outcomes begin to shift. And finally, we need to talk about failure. If we're going to reclaim failure, then we need to change the conversation around it. By which I mean we need to have a conversation around it. How can you tell if someone's achieved failure at the gym? Oh, don't worry, they'll tell you. I'm proud when I can't squeeze out the last rep. It means I did something new, something hard. This is where we need to get to at work. When you send the bold campaign or try that uber modern store display and it fails but you learn something, you have to talk about it. Let people see that you tried and you flopped, but you learned and you did something different as a result. If you can make that trend catch on, imagine how much more creativity you'd get to see happen at work. Wouldn't we all rather work in a more creative and inventive place where testing and learning is not only safe, but celebrated? I hope you'll join me next week for another great episode. Until then, you can follow Modern Mentor on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out my website at leadabovenoise.com or follow me on the Modern Mentor podcast page on LinkedIn. Thanks so much for listening and have a successful week. Modern Mentor is a quick and dirty tips podcast. It's audio engineered by Dan Farabend with script editing by Adam Cecil. Our podcast and advertising operations specialist is Morgan Christensen. Our digital operations specialist is Holly Hutchings. Our marketing and publicity assistant is Davina Tomlin. And our intern is Brendan Pica.